Good afternoon everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on the function system. I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of what the function system is, and then we'll look at how to set up for a particular function or an event. At that stage, I'm then going to hand over to Gary, who will take you through some parts of how to create the records for the donors, how to update those, and how to get some information back out of there. So things like the various reports that we have, and creating selection files or merge files from that. So to begin with, the first thing I want to indicate is that the system itself is part of the base system. So everybody will have the function system. So you can see here on the Start menu that we have the function option here, and when I click on there, it gives us the various options that we have in terms of using the function system. So what do we use the function system for? Well, essentially the idea of the function system is to help you run an event or a function. What it will do is it will allow you to, first of all, generate invitations perhaps to those people that have attended events in the past. So let's suppose you were running a ball this year and you've had balls over the last 2 or 3 years. What you can do is you can actually say, okay, let me create a list of people that I want to invite, and invite those people that have attended for any of those balls over the last few years. That way you can say to them, well, look, we know that these people have attended one of our galas. We know that they would have had a good time, so we can address them specifically to say, well, look, we're having another one. We know you've been in the past. Would you like to come again? Of course, you can invite other people as well. Now, once you've generated the list of people that you want to invite through whatever means, you can then make a record of that on the donor's history so that we can see who's been invited. Then as they RSVP and respond and say, yes, I want to come, or sorry, I can't make it, you can update that record to keep track of that. And therefore, while you're running the event in the lead up to it, you can produce lists of people, either say a function table listing based on who's sitting where if you've allocated seats and tables. You generate things like name badges or place names for tables for where they list, or if there's any last minute changes or updates that you need to communicate with them, you can send that information out to them. Maybe there's a change of venue or something else that you need to inform them. You can do that by pulling up a list of those people that have said they're coming. One of the advantages of using the function system over something like perhaps using a spreadsheet is you've got 2 different ways of accessing the data. You have the ability to look at a particular function and see who's been invited, who attended and who accepted, but also from a donor-by-donor basis you can look and see what the donor was actually invited to. So for instance, if you were using spreadsheets and you had a spreadsheet for all your different functions over the years, if I were to ask, well, what did Johnny Be Good get invited to? You'd have to look through all the various different spreadsheets just to find out, was he invited, did he attend, etc., etc. Whereas by putting that information into Donman, you can then actually very easily look at his history to see that. You can, if you want, also run the current event with a spreadsheet, and then using the spreadsheet to generate selection files, you can then update those records so that effectively you are keeping the history but still working off a spreadsheet. And one of the things that Gary will be doing is we'll be showing you how to update or create function records for each of those people in the various situations. So when we want to have a look at a donor, say, well, if we wanted to say, look and see who's been invited to a function, we can go to this thing called the function master code. And I'll be showing you how to create one of those shortly. But if we have a look at this, and I'll just page down and bring up Ball 2015, we've got all the basic information that we have in here, but by simply clicking on the dollar at the bottom, here I've got a list of any donations, because in this case I've linked this function to a campaign for ticket sales, and I'll cover that a bit later as well. But I've also got access to the function records. So you can see here, these are the people that I've invited. you can see which of those have actually accepted. So 2 have accepted, 1 said they couldn't make it, and you can see when they accepted, but you can also see who attended. So even though this particular person, Mr. Basil Faulty, said he couldn't make it, he actually did attend. So you've got all the information and things like how many people are attending and if you've assigned them tickets and seats and things like that. So this is now looking at it from the event or function perspective, but by actually going into a donor record, as part of their normal history, we can also find out what functions they've been invited to. So here I've got Fred Bloggs. If I go into the dollar, the bottom, you can see he paid $400 to the ball. But when I go to the function record, you can see he's been invited to 2 different balls, but he's been invited to 3 different golf days. He never even responded for the golf days, but he did actually accept and he did attend both of the different balls that he was invited to. So this is the sort of thing that you can't easily do when you're using a spreadsheet, because you've actually got to look up lots and lots of different spreadsheets just to see who Fred Bloggs was in, which functions he was invited to. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is how to actually set up a particular function. So like a lot of things, like when you're setting up a campaign, before you can actually set up a campaign record, there are certain codes that you may need to set up in advance. It's codes that are actually used on that. So there's actually 2 records, 2 different types of records that we use within the function system. First of all, we've got the master function code, which is 1 per event. And then for each person that gets invited, you create just an ordinary function record, and that's what keeps track of whether they were invited, attended, etc. So what I'm going to show you is how to actually set up a master function record. So we go into the function system, and down here, which is where I went just shortly before, we've got the function master code. But before you do that, especially if you've never used the function system before, then we need to set up some of these codes here that get used on the master code. So if we have a look at the status code here, it's like any other code that you're probably fairly familiar with. By looking at the drop-down list there, you can see I've set up 3 different codes, current, future, and past. And so that would be a reasonable sort of status, but you might have one postponed or cancelled or something like that, so that if the status changes and you decide not to go ahead with it, you can then say it was cancelled or you've postponed it for various reasons. So you can set up those codes, and that's fairly straightforward. The next code we look at is function type. And to a large extent, you can sort of vary how you use these codes, but what I've got set up here is ball, bequest lunch, if you have lunches for bequest people, golf day, open day, theatre events, things like that. If there's some other sort of event that you might want to do, you might say car rally, so I can just say car rally, that may or may not fit. No, that fits. So I'll just call it car rally. No, I don't want to archive it. Yes, I want to display it. Press enter, and when I look at my drop-down list, I've got car rally in there. The event codes, the function event codes, are things that you can pretty much use for anything that you like. One of the reasons that you might have a function code is for the various components of a function or event. So here I've got things like auction. So if you're having a ball, as part of that you may have some sort of silent auction. Depending on it, maybe at a lunch you might have awards. There may be some sort of raffle. And when we look at the master code, you can actually have a number of these for each event. So you could then go back and look at the ball for 2015 and say, oh yes, there was a silent raffle, there was a silent auction, there was a raffle, and maybe there was even awards presentations at the same time. But as I said, you can use this for anything you like. It's a little bit like on the donor record, you've got the extra codes, and you can use those for anything at all. So whatever you need to actually be able to specify, you can create a code for that. And these codes come in very useful when you're trying to do some sort of selection. Maybe you want a list of anybody that's attended an event where there was an auction or an award ceremony or anything like that, when Gary shows you how to create those selections, you'll see how those codes can then be used. Okay, so what we now need to do is we need to look at the function master code and how to set up one of those. Now, like they say, like they do on TVs, here's one I prepared earlier. So what I've got at the moment is one that I've called Ball 2016, and the name is basically up to 12 characters long. It doesn't matter what you call it, but it's always good to be consistent. So if your previous balls have been Ball 2014, Ball 2015, it makes sense to be consistent and call it Ball 2016. You've got the name over here where essentially it's just almost like a comment to say what this particular function is. Okay, so in this case I've said this is of type ball because that was one of those function types that we've looked at earlier on. Okay, now you don't have to if you don't want to, but you can link a function code, a function master code, to a campaign. Now, in order for this to work, the campaign name must be exactly the same as the function code, and it also must be set up as a function campaign. So let me escape from here, and I'm just going to go back into the campaign setup menu. And so if I go to campaign code, I can call up Ball 2016, and you can see here it says this is a sales and function campaign. Now, I've said sales because we're selling tickets, so it kind of is a sales campaign as well. And when I click on the end date and press enter, this is where I get the pop-up, and the pop-up is where I tell it what type of campaign this is. So you can see down here, I've said it's a sales campaign, but I've also said down here that it's a function campaign. Now, what you might choose to do is, because it's not actually a donation, you may say, I don't want to update the summary history and I don't want to update the summary totals. So now it says it's a sales and function campaign and I'm not updating the summary history or the summary totals. So that just means that on the second donor screen, if someone makes a payment for tickets, it won't include that in their overall total and count, nor will it update things like their first, their highest, their last 3 donations. Okay, so once I've got that set up and I've saved my campaign, then I can link it back to the actual function record. And you can link it after the fact as well. Now, the advantage of actually linking it to a campaign is twofold. In this case, well, actually, let me go back to Ball 2015. When I click on the dollar, because this one is also linked to a campaign, when I click on the dollar, you can see the donations or the payments to that campaign as well as the function records. Whereas if I don't link it to a particular campaign, then I will only see the function records. Okay, so going back to my Ball 2016, I've got the type, which I said was ball. We've got the linked to campaign over there. Now, because there is no money gone in so far, no one's actually made any payments, it's showing me that the total is 0. Okay, the date of the ball, in this case there is one and only date. However, you could, if you wanted to, have one function master code that represents several different but similar events. So for instance, if you ran a lunch paper maybe every couple of months, you might create the function code and call it lunch 2016, but when you set it up initially, you might have a lunch that's in January. Later on, you might have another one in March and another one later, etc., etc. So you can actually use the same function code for multiple different events. You can create function records, so that's the individual ones that go against the donors, multiple times, so long as there is a different date. So you could look at a donor's record and see that they were invited for lunch 2016 in January, but they couldn't attend. You invite them again in March, then again in June, and then they attend, so you probably don't bother to invite them after that. So you can actually have 3 records for the same function master code. Okay, looking further down, you've got a start time, if that's of any interest. The status, we're saying, is current, But of course, once this is over and done, you might put that back to past. The rationale is just why are we running that? The venue, the host, if there is one, guest of honour, Queen Elizabeth, yep, and the ticket cost we're saying is $200. Here I've got the event code, so you can see like extra codes on a donor, you can have up to 8 of those. So as I said, you can use those event codes for pretty much anything at all that you want. There's a comment, and then there's some basic statistics here which get updated when you create the function records to say they've been invited, when people update the record to say, yes, that person has accepted, this person has attended as well. Okay, so at this stage, I'm now going to hand over to Gary, who will now take you through creating and updating those function records that are for the individuals on a donor-by-donor basis.
Just need you to unmute yourself, Gary.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm muting myself again. And carrying on from where Murray has sort of said, we go and create the actual function record. The last thing I want to do is go into individual records and add the function details on there, because that would be fairly laborious. Normally, the step would be we'd go into donor appeals, create our donor selection file, and do the mail merge file. So this is how we, segment the data and say, here's who the people that I want to invite to the event based on your selection criteria. The mail merge file would be pretty much to do the actual mail merge for email or letters, for the actual invitation. But once we've got that selection of people, because we've already got the code set up in the function area, we can then go into functions, and you'll see the second item on the menu there says mass add or update function records. So this program will then allow us to choose a selection file of people to add a function record to in bulk, so we don't have to do all of those things. We can also use the same mechanism to update the function records later. So if perchance we said, on the night or the day, whenever the actual event was happening, we had a tablet or a laptop, whatever, that had Excel on it, and we had the actual people's names. As soon as you've got the donor numbers, we can then use that list to come back and update the records later. Okay, because a selection file is really nothing but a list of donor numbers. So if I go into this option, like any of the bulk changes in Donman, it'll say, have we done a backup? Normally backups happen on servers overnight and things like that. And in this case, because it's sort of really only playing with the function records, if something goes wrong, we can sort of fix it fairly easily normally. So in this case, I'm going to say, yes, I have done a backup, because I actually have. And then it'll ask me which selection file to use. So if I go down and see my, so I've got my Ball 2016 invite. So like any selection file, when you create it initially, give it a very nice, clear English name, because then you know exactly what list it is. So like normal, the system will come up saying, okay, there's 76 records in my selection file. And you can see the next question down says, am I updating records, creating new records, updating or deleting? Okay. So in this case, because none of the donors actually have an invite or a function record attached for the Ball 2016, I'd be say N for new records, if I get in the right spot. Okay. Okay, so new records, and then I get the option to choose one of the function codes that Murray showed you how to set up earlier. So in this case, I'll go down to my Ball 2016. The system will automatically then pick up the date of the function from the function master record. Okay. If I go through and say, when I'm doing new records, so I'm doing this very initial step, then the only thing really I need to put in is, yes, I invited these people, and in this case, if I'm doing the invites today, we'll just do today. So in this case, accepted will be blank, and attended will be blank, because I don't know one way or the other at this point. I just want to earmark the people instead of updating mail history as we would do for a, an appeal or a newsletter or something like that, in this case, the function record itself will tell me that this person, was part of that list. So if I enter through, I don't have to put anything else, and then say yes to continue. And that will then go through and update each of the donors in that selection file. Okay, so it basically comes up with a screen showing me, everything I said yes and no to on the front screen, how many donors, etc., how many records were selected. So I can close that down. So up to this point, I've done what I need to with this. If I need to go back to a donor's record, okay, as we scroll through, you'll see down the bottom here where the function button is, records that have got a function, this will be highlighted, like any of the alpha buttons, if the text is red saying there's something there to look at. In this case, if I click on the function record, and you can see in this case here, it's come up with an older function record. Okay. So they weren't part of my list that I've just done. If I go back and say I'm looking for donor 12, so in this case, these people were part of a list or they're part of that function record already. So the system initially would have updated them to this point where it says, here's the event, here's the date. If, in this case, I said yes, invited, the date I sent out the initial invitations, okay. And in this case, because I've done this one earlier, this person has already responded. So as soon as I put a Y in here, if I take that date out to show you, and enter, the system will automatically update the acceptance date with the current date. From there, I can go through, and this is the flag later that we update after the event to say this person attended. So we've got all of the things Murray was showing you before on that summary screen so we can see everything about them. In this case, because I've got a record that is a Mr. and Mrs. record, and they're both going to attend, I can say number attending is 2. Okay. The host in this case would be if they're sitting, say, at a table that was hosted by somebody else. So again, we would create codes in here. And I can say, yes, they're sitting at the table hosted by Acme Company. Okay. So whether you use the table or ticket numbers is really up to yourself. But there is a mechanism in the system where you can, if you use the table and ticket numbers, print a listing so you've got, basically a table listing. There is a point where Donman finishes doing this sort of role. So it's not a function management system as such. So it's not going to keep tabs on how many tables you've got and how many chairs you've got at each table and when they get filled and give you alerts and things like that. It's really just to keep the records, for yourself. So in this case, if I said, well, these people are at table 1 and he's got seat 1, but I've got 2 people attending. So what I've had to do in this case is leave Andrew's record, and you'll see down the bottom of the screen here, attendees is in red. So what I've done is add Mrs. Andrews as an attendee as well. So this is just so that all my numbers will sort of gel. And on her record, you can see she's also at table 1 and seat number 2. This will become more useful later when we have a look at how to do the table listing report to show me, where I've actually put people. Like any event, of course, people will sometimes say, I don't want to sit there, or, there's things, so you'll move people around. Okay. The same sort of mechanism would exist if you had ticket numbers. So if you said, this person had bought 2 tickets and they weren't necessarily table numbers, so we're having, like an AGM, or we're just having some other event where we've just issued people with tickets so that they can get in at the door. So in that case, you may just have a ticket number, and if there's more than one, you'll have a ticket range. Okay. So normally you use one or the other. You wouldn't be using both of those together. So in this case, it's basically got number of tickets, okay, 2, and in this case only because I've got 2 people. Okay, the cost per ticket is I've put in, and the total cost is calculated based on that. The field at the bottom of the screen here, the total paid, will update automatically when we process the payment. So if I go and have a look at the donor's history and go back to donors, so I can see there's the function record there. If I go back to donations, we can say, yes, earlier today they paid $300 for the ball 2016, so for the tickets. And because they've done that, that will then update this total paid field. So this is just showing me that if I want to put in, how much the tickets were, the system will calculate that for me. But if I want to know they've actually paid for the tickets and they've paid in full, the total paid is relying on us putting in an actual transaction so that we can, get that to update. So where Murray was showing you earlier that you set up the campaign and you say that, yes, it's a function campaign, the function record itself and the campaign record need to have the same code in order for this to sort of gel. Because sometimes, so if you've got a multi-tiered sort of event where you're saying, look, part of it's ticket sales, then I've got sponsorship, and I've got a raffle, and I've got an auction, and I've got all of these, components of the actual event itself, then you might have a code which is basically just like this one, Ball 2016, which is primarily just for ticket sales, okay? Or you could have a tick on the end of it or something like that, but as long as the campaign and the function have the same name, this will sort of all kick off very nicely and sort of go through for us. Okay. So once we've got all the records in there, at the moment I have got, some people that have accepted, as we just saw. I've got, a whole lot of people that are invited and things like that. So what we might do on the day of the event is say, look, now we want to do an actual final list of people, that have said yes, they're going to come, and that will become our checklist for people turning up on the night. So if we go back into the function area, you'll see an option here that says create function merge file. So this program will allow me to create a merge file, but also to create a selection file if I want to do, something else with the records. So if we go into there, at the top of the screen you'll see it'll create a Microsoft Merge, Word merge file, or both. So in this case, if I said I don't need the selection file because I've created everyone that I need to and I've sent out the invites, then I might just say I'm going to do a merge file. And then we can type a name in. So in this case, I've got Ball 2016. Okay, and this then might become my final list for the night or the afternoon. Okay. From there, just like we do when we do the selection on donors, this has now got questions about different aspects of the function records to say, am I looking for people that are, based on the code, or only people that have accepted the invitations, whatever it may be. So in this case, if I select by function code, yes, and then go down, and again, I've got my list of all my functions. So if I go into my ball, so that's the only one I want, just enter will take me back. So in this case, if I've selected the code, I wouldn't necessarily need to worry about the date itself. Yeah. If, however, we've got a number of codes that have been reused with the dates, as Murray said before, then I might say, yes, I'm looking for that code, but only the event that was run on this date range. So either a particular date or a range of dates. So in this case, if I know that everyone was invited, I don't need to select by the invited status or the date that they're invited, but I might want to say, yes, I want to select people who've accepted the invite to the event. Again, if I said I only want people who, I'm updating a list or something, then I might say I'm just looking for people who've an acceptance, this week. So it depends if you're doing it. For most things, it's easier just to do a complete list because it doesn't take very long to get the data back out of there. Okay. After the event, and I've updated the records, then this is where I could say, yes, I'm looking for people for Fall 2016, but people who attended the event. Okay. So based on all of the fields and the data that you saw on the actual function records themselves, this program will allow me then to start segmenting the data and pulling a list of people out, either as a text file or a selection file, as I said, based on that criteria. So if I go through, and so in this case I'm not worried about table numbers or how many people are attending, it will take me through to a second screen, and this is where, again, if I'm, know what's in the data, and I said I want to select, people with ticket numbers from and to, select ticket numbers, etc., whatever it might be. Do I want to select by function host code? So if I had put in, a number of people that were at a particular table or tables hosted by somebody, then again I could say yes, and I'd have my code to select. Yeah. So like most things you do with data and Donman, it sort of follows the logical procession of saying, look, if we put everything in the spot it's supposed to be, then pulling the data out is not going to be a real big pain in the bum. Okay, so as we go through, do I want to select by function status code, so you could select only current events and not select on the previous screen by the actual event code. So there's quite a bit of flexibility of who it is that you're trying to pull up when you do this process. But it is clearly only based on what's on the function records itself. So you don't have donation history, you don't have the donor codes or anything like that. The only codes that do come into play are the normal ones when we do a selection of excluding donors who are date of death, okay, or excluding donors with the mail code no mail or no mail after until today. So the same as you do for a normal selection file. If perchance you say, look, I know there's people that have been invited and have accepted, but they are marked not to get mail normally, then I say, no, don't exclude those people and override. If perchance I had somebody that we'd been notified had passed away in between invites and everything else, then of course I'd say yes, exclude those records. Okay. So you can here select by donor mail code, but most of it, if I've already updated the function records of the people, it's the function record itself that I'd be starting to utilize. So if we go through, okay, so in this case I don't need to load Word, I just want to create the file that I can open in Excel. So if I say yes, the fields that are going to come out as part of the output will come up here. So just like when you do a mail merge for a donor appeal, you'll have the address field, so the address block up the top here, the salutation, the function, date, donor number. So these fields above the line will come out as the core fields, so no matter what. After that, we'll have certain fields that we can select from. So if I go back to functions, and said I'm looking for another field that's on the function record, like accepted or whatever it may be, I can just click that and add it, okay? And that's now down the bottom of my screen. I can see I've got accepted. Okay. So once you add those fields, you don't need to worry about doing anything else. If we continue, okay, so that will normally print out. So in my case, I've got a PDF printer set as my default to save a bit of paper. Okay. So just like some of the other things in Donman, that when we go through it saying, look, here's the selection, the function select program, all the questions I said yes and no to, what I selected, so in this case Ball 2016, and in this case it's showing me it's selected 31 records out of my, so 6.23% of my database. So what I have got now, if I click on open file at the bottom here, change that to text files. Okay, so I've got my Ball 2016 final.txt, and you can see it is just a merge file, so you can use it for anything at all that you'd normally use. So if you're going to use it for a check-off list, then I'd open it in Excel, and then I could get rid of the addresses. If I said, look, I really don't need to have the full address there, or the date and things like that, but I do want to have the donor number, so that I can mark them off to say, yes, they attended, and then use that list of donor numbers later to create a selection file to update the records in bulk and say, here's all the people that actually attended. So that's good for doing things in bulk, but if I had gone through and said, okay, look, we've created function records for a whole lot of people, but then later on I've got a record that needed to be invited to the event that wasn't initially for one reason or another. So if I go through and find the donor, I can click on functions, and I can set it up manually if I need to. Okay, so again, the function, invited, yes, and again, we'll put today's date in there. Okay, so again, at this point, I'd say accepted is nothing, and attended, etc. So just go through and enter. So when we look at the record again later, okay, so when we save that donor and that updates the screen, the function button will go red to say this person now has a function for that. So even though they weren't part of the mass updating of the function records, they will have an event recorded against them. Okay, so if we now go here, I can see, yes, they've got the function. Okay, so all they've got really is just that they were invited, and I've got the function code itself and the date of the actual event. So that sort of allows me to do that. So if I have done that and I've got a number of records, then that's why it's important, as you're getting nearer to the actual final numbers or things like that for the event, is to go through and show that, look, let's extract the data again, because if I've updated records manually, they weren't part of that initial list. I want to make sure that my final checkoff list is everyone for the day. I don't want to have, people that are, turning up and then saying, oh, you're not on the list. That's a bit weird. Embarrassing for everyone, really. So if we can avoid that. So you can set it up, as I showed, you can go through, do the mass add or update function records, and say, okay, yes, I can do that from the selection file. We can create the mail merge file or a selection file based on the function records we've set up, okay? Or we can set it up manually. So once we've got our function all set up, and we said, okay, now what we want to do is actually, from the table listing that we've got, we've put people on certain tables and certain seat numbers and things like that. So if I now want to do a listing of those, we can go back into the function area and then into function table listing. So in this case, again, I'd go and select the event that I'm wanting to do the report on. Okay, so I might then, in this case, say I only want to include people that have accepted. So I don't want to get a listing of absolutely everybody, because if they haven't accepted, I probably haven't assigned them a table or a seat. Okay. But you have got the option to say, no, I don't want only those people, I want absolutely everybody. Okay. When you set up the function record, either in bulk or manually, the system by default will put that there's at least one record attending. If there's more, like we add attendees or things like that, then the number will update, so we can see that, under one donor, we may have 2 or 3 or even more people turning up to the event. Okay. So if I go through and print preview my report, okay. So now it's coming up with the table number that I've already designated. In this case, the record that we're looking at earlier, so Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, and I can see because I've put Mrs. Andrea as a attendee, so that my numbers sort of all gel, you can see that it's now telling me there's 7 people at the table and there's 7 tickets. Under the Mr. and Mrs. record, as we're showing that there's 2 people attending, under the attendee record itself, it won't have a number, because that should link back up to the actual number on the donor's record. So that'll sort of link up. So you can see that you can then sort of get your table listing and figure out, from there, okay, I've got, 10 tables, so I've still got a number of tables that I haven't allocated anybody to. If I need to move people around, I need to go back to the function record on the donor and change the, the table or the seat number that they might be on. So if, as I said, well, this lady here, Lorraine Castles, just rang up and said, look, she wants to sit at table number 5. Okay, so if I look at here, I see under table 5, I've already allocated seat 1 and seat 2. So if I go into this donor here and say, okay, what I need to do is go and find the donor and then go into their function record, and from there I can then change that over. And then when I do the report again, that will refresh. So if I said, okay, look, we've now got our list. Normally, yes, you print it out so you can sort of scribble on it and do what you need to. But if I go back and say, Lorraine Castle, so again, her function is highlighted. If we go in and say, yes, I found the one. So if the donor has more than one function record, the one that is the most recent one is normally the default one. And down the bottom here, where you've got the buttons left and right of the history button, the dollar button here, the text or the arrows on the button will highlight red to tell you that there's more records to look at. But the way Murray showed you before to look at the records via the donor history is absolutely the better way, because you can see all of the details there. In this case, there is no other record. The buttons are black, so to say there's nothing else. But if I needed to now say, okay, I need to change this person and put them on table number 5 and seat number 3. Yeah, so then I can save that. Get out of the donor record, go back into functions, do my table listing again. Okay, so as we go down, so we can now see that we've got Mrs. Castle is now on table 5, seat number 3. Yeah. So it's just a way of managing, or having some sort of check-off list that you can actually put up so people know which seat or which table they're sitting at. You might not actually have seat numbers. You might just say that these people are sitting at a particular table. Again, totally up to you what you want to actually utilize that for. So there are lots of cases where going into each record when people have accepted an invitation will become a little bit laborious, because if I'm not using Donman all the time, but I go into data entry, I then have to find the person, what it might be, go through, see if they've then got the function record for that, and then go in and say yes, accepted, and then save that. Yeah. So by itself, not a big problem, but there, from discussions with lots of organizations, people sometimes say, look, it's easier to sort of, from the initial invitations, create a spreadsheet that people can, share and update in bulk. The primary thing to remember, of course, is make sure that you have the donor number somewhere on that file, because if I then want to, sort by all the people who've accepted, I can sort by that column, pick up the list of donor numbers, and I can go through, and without necessarily putting in the date that they accepted, update them in bulk to say, yes, here's all the people that have actually accepted, and the same sort of thing for after the event to say, here's all the people that have actually attended the event. So we've got that history, because as Murray said, a spreadsheet's good. It's a nice snapshot, and you can use it at the time, but if you're trying to see history, it's certainly no good, because even if you've got a spreadsheet that's got multiple tabs, trying to find out if one donor or a couple of donors are on multiple of those tabs is a bit of a pain to go through normally, to look at each tab and then see if that person's there. So really it's about building the history, just like we do for the money and things like that. The events is just another form of history that we're trying to keep tabs on, so we know what sort of things people are interested in attending. Murray showed you earlier was people who will come to certain events, the formal events like the ball, but they might not come to a golf day or something like that. Whereas there'll be people that are the opposite that say, look, I'm very happy to go to a sort of more relaxed sort of event than I am to go through and do anything else. So it's just a matter of allowing you to profile those people basically based on what sort of interest and what sort of things they've attended before. You'll get people that don't attend any events and people that attend just about every event. So having that history is sort of paramount to updating all of the details. So most of it's pretty easy to sort of manage as you go through. As I said, it's really just a matter of going through that initial step of going through donor appeals, create your donor selection file to say, here's the people that are going to get the invite. Once we've done that, do the mail merge for the invite. Everything else then, using the same selection file, we go back into the function area and use the mass add or update function records to go through and create a function record for those people in bulk. But as I've showed you, you can still do that manually after the actual invites have gone out. If there's people that come up, or someone might approach you and say, oh look, I just heard about that event, I'd like to go. You can certainly add those manually. So there's no sort of hard and fast rule saying, oh look, once you've done it in bulk, bad luck, you can't do anything like that. Update it whichever way you need to, but then utilize that data. So we can do the table listing, we can create the function merge file based on all of the different aspects of the function, and hopefully that gives people a bit of an insight into what you can do with this area of Donman. So there are people that utilize it for their events, etc. And as Murray said, it might not necessarily be an event where you've got money, so you don't necessarily have to have something where you've got money or people pay for a ticket. In this case here, where I've got the ball, and I said, well, yes, there are going to be ticket payments. Like Murray was saying, over here I've actually linked the campaign to the function, and as the money's been processed, it's now showing me how much money has come in. Okay? Allows me to see the function records and the payment history all under that record. But you might have something like an AGM where you just want to keep tabs on who got invited, who said they're going to come, or, if you don't have to say you're coming, but after the event, if we've got some sort of check-off list, especially if people are voting, so that we know who actually attended the event. Whether you hold a volunteer event and you just want to keep tabs. So any sort of thing like that, they're not necessarily about formal events or anything like that. It's just saying, look, it's very easy to update the records so that we can go through and say, okay, look, let's tie all this together so that we can, have that history against the records. So hopefully that's answered or, shown people a little bit about the function area. And I'll hand back to Marlon now for any questions that we might have about this.